I'd like my grandchildren to be able to see that their grandmother stood up for something a long time ago. Those are important words for those of you wondering how to plan your day. Those words were spoken by a woman named Claudette Colvin. Claudette passed away on January 13th of this year, having left the world much as she lived her life, quietly, humbly, and without fanfare. But in 1955, Claudette Colvin stood up, or rather, she remained seated, in a choice that would alter the course of American history. At the time, she was a young black girl from a working-class family, and as class, as much as her race, plays a role in why people don't know her story. But neither her social status nor her race diminished her courage, her impact, or her legacy. American democracy is today stronger because she chose to act, or in the words of the historian Timothy Snyder, she chose to not obey an unjust system. 9 months before Rosa Parks famously refused to give up her seat to a white passenger on a Montgomery, Alabama municipal bus, 15-year-old Claudette Colvin was returning home from school one March afternoon and boarded a Montgomery city bus. Like any other day, she sat in the neutral zone, the middle section from where, as the bus filled up, the driver could order black passengers to move to the back. But unlike any other day, Claudette made a choice that March 2nd. She simply would not give up her seat. At the intersection of Bibb and Commerce Streets in Montgomery, predictably, the bus started to fill up with white people, and the driver, as he would do every day, instructed several black passengers, including Claudette Colvin, to give up their seats. All of them but one complied. Claudette Colvin stayed seated, and seated she would remain. 2 police officers were called in. Nevertheless, she persisted in her personal and, at the time, lonely protest. The teenager, Colvin, was arrested, handcuffed, and forcibly removed from the bus. But her story doesn't end there. Claudette Colvin went on to challenge segregation itself, becoming a key plaintiff in Browder v. Gale, the landmark case that ultimately struck down Montgomery's bus segregation laws, while Rosa Parks' case, which had successfully kicked off the historic Montgomery bus boycott, was still languishing in state court. Which is to say, every piece of resistance to segregation was important. Every piece was crucial. The figures who became famous, fixtures of history, as well as those whose work and whose names are written below the fold. Claudette Colvin has shown us something that we all know deep inside, something we know this very history-making morning. She demonstrated the power of one. Our national story is forged by countless moments like that, decisive action in which a single choice becomes one domino among many, and over time, bending the arc of this country's history towards something more just, more inclusive, and more equal. American democracy is less sustained by grand gestures, headlines, or showy sound bites than by ordinary people acting in quiet, decisive moments, standing up for justice, or in Claudette Colvin's case, remaining seated. These individual choices, separated by time and generations, do more than challenge a single moment in time, because together they alter the course of history. They build a stronger and a more resilient democracy. Let's go back even farther to the Boston Tea Party, our nation's first great act of rebellion. On December 16, 1773, a group of ordinary American colonists made a choice. On that night in Boston Harbor, they boarded British ships and hurled chests of tea overboard to protest taxation without representation. They were merchants, laborers, craftsmen, ordinary people. Yet their actions sparked a movement larger than any one of them, a movement that would give birth to a nation. More than that, it gave rise to a powerful ethos at the heart of this nation's identity, one that each generation of Americans seems to rediscover in its own time. That is, that in America, true power rests in the hands of the people. America is not defined simply by its geography, by points on a map. This country endures the same way it began, through ordinary people choosing to fight for something that is bigger than themselves. The Declaration of Independence owes its very existence to that ethos. All men are created equal. That seminal phrase appears in the first sentence of the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, forming part of the foundational statement that government derives its power from the consent of the governed and that basic human rights are universal. The Declaration was signed in Philadelphia in 1776, a moment in history that would formally unshackle a nation from its oppressors and set the stage for what would become a global beacon of democracy. Let's be very clear for a moment. Neither the nation nor its founders would live up to that credo for many decades to come. But the idea The idea of universal human rights and government with the consent of the people was baked in from the beginning. 272 miles from that historic signing and decades later, in 1848, that same spirit of resistance gave rise to America's first women's rights convention in Seneca Falls, New York. On July 20th of that year, a group of women adopted what they called a Second Declaration of Independence, formally launching the U.S. women's civil rights movement. Known as the Declaration of Sentiments, it was largely authored by Elizabeth Cady Stanton, a pioneering suffragist and intellectual force behind the movement. That document drew explicitly on the language and ideals of 1776 to demand women's equality and full participation in society and politics. Like the original Declaration of Independence, it began with a list of grievances, enumerating the repeated injuries and usurpations on the part of man toward woman, including legal restrictions on married women, denial of political rights, the structural inequalities that limit women's opportunities. The document boldly declared, quote, "He has made her, if married in the eyes of the law, civilly dead. He has taken from her all rights in property, even the wages she earns. In the covenant of marriage, she is compelled to promise obedience to her husband, he becoming, to all intents and purposes, her master. The law giving him power to deprive her of her liberty and to administer chastisement," end quote. Stanton would not live to see women secure the right to vote, but the movement she helped launch carried that cause across generations, driven in part by her clear-eyed understanding that lasting change often demands a lifetime of work, and sometimes without the promise of witnessing its final victory. You may plant the seed of a tree today whose fruit you may not enjoy, but someone, maybe your grandchildren, will. As Stanton reminds us from beyond the grave, the history of the past is but one long struggle upward to equality. It also bears noting that even when women's suffrage was realized with the ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920, more than 70 years after Seneca Falls, its promise was not equally realized. While it enfranchised white women, it would be another 45 years before black Americans secured the universal right to vote in practice with the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965. Even when the fight seems like it's over, it's never really over. And it was another 25 years after that another group would quite literally make the climb for equal rights in what became known as the Capitol Crawl. On March 12, 1990, over 1,000 disability rights activists marched from the White House to the U.S. Capitol to demand passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA. Watch this. To illustrate just how many obstacles people with disabilities encounter daily, more than 60 of those activists left their wheelchairs and painstakingly crawled up the 83 stone steps of the United States Capitol. One of them was Jennifer Keelan Chaffins, an 8-year-old girl. Her first encounter with discrimination came at the age of 6, when she and other disabled activists were denied service at a restaurant and told, quote, "People don't want to watch you eat," end quote. People don't want to watch you eat. By the age of 6, she had already participated in her first protest. By the age of 7, she was arrested during a peaceful protest. By the time the Capitol Crawl came around, Jennifer was already a seasoned activist at the ripe old age of 8. Some organizers initially worried that it might not be a good idea to allow a child to climb the 83 steps. Jennifer pushed back, quote, "If somebody my age didn't do it, then nobody from my generation would be represented." One organizer looked at her and said, "You need to do what's in your heart." And so Jennifer did what was in her heart. She joined dozens of activists, leaving their wheelchairs behind and pulling themselves up those marble steps one by one. And boy, was she determined to reach the top.
Take your time, Jennifer. You want to take a break? I'll take all night if I have to. All right.
In their pockets, they carried with them copies of the Declaration of Independence, and when they made it to the top, they delivered those copies to members of Congress. There's a reason why I'm telling you this story, because a few months after that, President George H.W. Bush signed the ADA into law, marking the passage of the world's first comprehensive civil rights law protecting the rights of people with disabilities. And because of that law, public spaces, services, and buildings today are required to be accessible to all Americans. Looking back as an adult, Jennifer reflected, quote, "The further up the steps I went, the more I felt empowered. I felt like I had all of the kids behind me who couldn't be there. I felt that it was important, not just to represent myself, but to represent them and their voices. Today, on No King's Day, another historic protest unfolds right now. Millions across this country will reclaim their agency, and they will march to defend their democracy from authoritarianism. America is what it is because an 8-year-old girl from Michigan could look at the adults around her, assert her right to protest, and pull herself up 83 marble steps. America is what it is because a 15-year-old schoolgirl from Alabama could challenge an entire system in a single defiant act of sitting. America is what it is because ordinary Americans throughout history have stepped forward in the name of something greater than themselves, often without knowing how far the ripples of their actions would reach. These countless small acts of courage taken together nourish and sustain our democracy. Today, history knocks on all of our doors, and organizers expect that at least 10 million of us will answer. 10 million of us will carry with us the sacrifices and legacies of our ancestors in this country and others. 10 million of us will carry the promise of a more perfect nation forward. And in doing so, 10 million of us will join the illustrious line of Americans past and present who have always kept the promise of this nation alive. History will knock on your door any minute now. Will you answer?